Hello everyone. Please subscribe to the channel for more incredible stories. And don't forget to like this video and comment what you would do in this situation. Get ready for a story that will grab you from the very first second. Can you imagine leaving the love of your life due to family pressure, only for the truth to return 5 years later in the most impactful way possible? 5 years ago, a millionaire CEO, pressured by his elitist parents, ended things with the love of his life. 5 years later, she reappeared with 2 little boys who were his spitting image, a past that haunts the present. Mason Anderson was a man the world admired. At 32, he was the CEO of Anderson Innovations, a multi-million-dollar tech empire built on artificial intelligence and cloud computing. He graced the covers of magazines, gave speeches at global summits, and shook hands with presidents. Every photo of him showed the same impeccable image: perfectly styled golden blonde hair, piercing blue eyes that held just the right amount of detachment, and a smile that could close deals before he ever read a contract. He lived in a penthouse above the city park, drove a custom electric sports car, and wore tailored suits worth more than most people's rent. To anyone on the outside, he was flawless, disciplined, and destined for greatness. But there was one thing Mason didn't have, and once almost risked everything for: love. 5 years prior, before he fully stepped into his role as CEO, Mason had been with someone who didn't fit into the plan his family had laid out for his life. Her name was Isla. She wasn't a socialite or a tech investor. She hadn't been born into wealth. She was an architecture student paying her way through school with scholarships and part-time jobs, with smudges of charcoal on her jeans and sketchbooks filled with messy drafts. She had long brown hair, expressive blue eyes, and a way of looking at Mason that made him feel like he was more than his title. With her, he didn't have to perform. With her, he laughed louder, slept better, and dreamed more freely. They met at a charity event he had only attended out of obligation. She was helping set up stage lights, and he bumped into her while checking his phone. It was the most human moment he had in months. Their relationship blossomed in private. Long walks through the city, takeout on their patios, late-night conversations about dreams and fears. She didn't care about his money. She teased him about his expensive watch and refused to let him pay her rent. She made him feel real in a world where everything about him seemed curated. For the first time in his life, he imagined a future that didn't revolve around quarterly profits or board meetings. He pictured a small wedding, a cozy home, children with blue eyes and untamed energy. He imagined Isla in every version of that future, but his parents had other plans. When they found out about Isla, the reaction was immediate and brutal. His father, Carlos Anderson, the chairman of the board and one of the coldest men Mason had ever known, called him into his office and told him bluntly, "She is not your equal. She cheapens your image. Marry her, and we will begin the process of removing you from the succession." His mother didn't bother to hide her disdain either. "Do you really want to embarrass the family?" she asked. "What will the shareholders think when they see you with someone so ordinary?" Mason tried to fight back. He told them he didn't care about perception. But Anderson Innovations wasn't just a company. It was an empire, passed down through 3 generations. His name was a brand. His face was an investment. And as the pressure mounted, from his family, the board, the consultants who reminded him of his obligations, Mason felt the walls closing in. The worst part was, he never told Isla the truth. One day, he simply ended it, without explanation or argument. He told her he needed to focus on his career and walked out of her apartment, leaving behind the woman he had once imagined a forever with. Isla called once, then twice, then she stopped. He never answered. He buried himself in work and tried to convince himself that it had been necessary, that it was for the best. But not a single day went by that he didn't think of her, that he didn't see something that reminded him of the life he had left behind. He missed her laugh, the way she said his name when she was angry, the way she made him feel like a man, not a product. Still, he never reached out, because admitting he was wrong would mean facing everything he had given up. And in that moment, Mason Anderson didn't know how to face regret. Not yet. At this point in the story, what do you think of Mason's decision? Do you believe he had another option? Let me know your opinion below. I'd love to read it. And now, let's see what happened to Isla. A solitary choice and an inevitable meeting. Isla had never believed in fairy tales, but falling in love with Mason Anderson had felt dangerously close to one. For a brief time, it had been more than she had ever dreamed of. She remembered the warmth in his eyes when he looked at her as if she were the only person in the world. She remembered the nights on the patio when the city lights made the sky feel infinite and Mason whispered about wanting to escape the world of cameras and boardrooms just to live a normal life. With her. She believed him, every word, every unfinished promise in the spaces between their kisses and silence. But one day, he was gone. No goodbye, no explanation. Just a cold, carefully worded message that he needed space to focus on his future. She had hoped he would call, tried to find him, left him a long, desperate voicemail, then another. But the silence that followed wasn't empty. It was deliberate. It was final. And so, she stopped waiting. Isla threw herself into her work, turning her broken heart into blueprints and deadlines, trying to get lost in her studies. But just a few weeks later, she began to feel the changes in her body, the fatigue, the nausea, the lateness. She told herself it was stress. But when she took a pregnancy test and saw the result, her breath hitched. She didn't cry. She just stood in the bathroom, staring at the word positive as if it were written in another language. Then, she sat on the edge of her bed and didn't say anything for a long time. The doctor confirmed her pregnancy, but the ultrasound revealed something she hadn't expected. 2 heartbeats, twins, 2 lives growing inside her, 2 reminders of a man who had walked away without looking back. She considered calling him again. She imagined what he would say, but then she remembered the voicemail, the cold brush-off from his assistant, the way he had faded as if she meant nothing, and she realized she couldn't go through that again. So she didn't call. She didn't write. She deleted his number. She accepted, in the deepest part of her soul, that he wasn't coming back. Isla decided to leave the city. There was no place for her there anymore. She took a job in a smaller town, at an architectural firm, where no one asked questions about her past. She rented a modest apartment and lived carefully, saving every penny. The twin pregnancy was hard, but she was tougher. She worked through swollen feet, sleepless nights, and the terror of being completely alone in the world. She took prenatal vitamins with food stamps. She skipped meals to pay for baby clothes. And when the time came, she gave birth to 2 healthy, beautiful boys, Leo and Sam. They had golden blonde hair from the start and the bluest eyes she had ever seen. It was like looking at 2 tiny versions of the man she had once loved. At first, it broke her heart to see Mason in their faces. But over time, that feeling softened into something else, something fiercer. Love. Not for what could have been, but for what was. Her sons were everything. They were wild, loud, messy, and perfect. They were the reason she got out of bed when her body ached and her bank account hit zero. She worked late. She took on freelance jobs. She drew up plans for shops, cafes, and even barns. Anything to keep the lights on. She fed her boys, clothed them, kissed their boo-boos, and read them bedtime stories, even when she was too tired to stand. Isla never spoke Mason's name, not once. When the boys would ask why they didn't have a daddy, she would tell them the truth gently, that sometimes people walk away because they are afraid of love, and that it isn't their fault, or ours. She didn't talk of revenge. She didn't dwell in the past. She poured all of her energy into raising two curious and courageous boys who had no idea they carried a last name that once ruled a city. Do you think Isla did the right thing by not telling Mason about the twins? Would you have done the same? Or would you have tried to contact him again? And yet, in the quiet of the late night, when they were sleeping, she would sometimes find herself wondering what Mason would say if he saw them. Would he recognize them as his? Would he feel anything at all? Or would he do what he did best? Turn and pretend none of it mattered. She told herself it didn't matter, that she didn't care, that she had built a life without him. And it was true. But fate, as it always does, had other plans. The world comes crashing down, and the truth is revealed. The invitation came unexpectedly, tucked away in Isla's modest email inbox with a generic subject line: Architectural Futures Forum. Speaker selection. At first, she thought it was a mistake. She had never spoken at a major event, let alone in a big metropolis. But the message was real. They had reviewed her design proposal for a low-cost, sustainable, and community-focused women's shelter, and they wanted her to speak on the panel. It wasn't paid, but they would cover travel and lodging. It was the opportunity she had dreamed of for years, and the kind of recognition she never thought she'd receive as a single mother of two, fighting in the background of the architectural world. She hesitated for only a moment. Then she said yes. Returning to the city after 5 years felt surreal. Everything looked the same, but nothing felt familiar. She arrived with Leo and Sam, two energetic 5-year-olds, who asked questions non-stop on the flight, who gasped at the skyline and said the buildings looked like Lego towers. She dressed them carefully for the forum, in little collared shirts and clean sneakers, and packed a bag full of coloring books and snacks to keep them busy while she spoke. She had no one to watch them, and wasn't going to let that hold her back. They sat patiently near the back of the exhibit space as she stood next to her model of the shelter, her palms slightly sweaty and her heart racing. The event was held in a downtown skyscraper with glass walls that wrapped around the venue and sunlight pouring in. She tried not to think about the possibility of running into anyone she knew. The city was big. He wouldn't be there. Why would he be? Then she heard his voice. She was in the middle of answering a journalist's question when the voice, low, confident, and too familiar to ignore, cut through the air. She froze. Her stomach twisted before her eyes confirmed it. Mason Anderson was less than 20 feet away, laughing softly with a group of sponsors in sleek suits. He hadn't changed, his blonde hair still immaculate, his posture as poised as ever, but older now, harder around the edges. His expression was placid until it landed on her. Isla saw the moment he realized. First, confusion. Then, shock. Then, something deeper. His eyes darted past her to the two little boys sitting on the floor behind her table, quietly coloring on the carpet. Time slowed down. Mason's face went pale. His gaze locked on the twins, and Isla could see the gears turning, fast and desperate. She didn't move, didn't smile, didn't look away. He started to walk toward her. She stood rigid, gripping the edge of the exhibit table as if it could anchor her to the floor. The people around them seemed to fade into a blur of background noise. The city, the forum, the years, everything shrank to this one impossible moment. He stopped in front of her, his voice barely audible. "Isla." She didn't answer. He looked back at the children, then back at her, visibly shaken. "Are they?" She held his gaze. "Yes," she said calmly and quietly. "They're yours." He recoiled, stunned. For a moment, he looked like a man who had just been hit. "I didn't know," he said. "I had no idea." "I know," she replied, her voice steady. "I tried." "You made sure I couldn't track you down," he stammered, trying to process everything. "But why didn't you try again?" Isla laughed softly, a bitter, tired sound. "I did. I left messages. I sent letters. Your assistant told me not to call again. I assumed you had made your decision." Mason looked down, the weight of the realization settling heavily on his face. He looked back at the children, who still had no idea who he was. Leo looked up, smiled, and waved innocently. "I need to talk to you," Mason said, his voice cracking just a little. Isla crossed her arms. "Now you want to talk? After 5 years? At a public event?" He hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Yes, I need to explain, and I need to understand." She stared at him for a long time. The pain she had buried deep inside her bubbled to the surface, but she didn't let him see it. "Not here, not yet. You don't get to walk back into this like nothing happened," she said. "But if you really want to understand, start by learning their names." Mason looked at her, and something broke in his eyes. He turned to the children, knelt down, and asked them gently, "What are your names?" The twins looked at him, bewildered but curious. "I'm Leo," one said. "I'm Sam," the other added. "What's your name?" Mason smiled sadly. "I'm Mason." They didn't recognize him. Why would they? Isla watched from behind the table, her heart pounding. This wasn't the moment she had prepared for. She never thought it would come. And yet, here they were. Not as strangers, not yet as family. But something had begun to shift. The truth was finally out in the open, and nothing would ever be the same. Give this video a like it if you think they deserve a second chance. And don't forget to subscribe to see the continuation. The fight for a second chance. Mason didn't sleep that night. After the forum, after the longest, most jarring day of his life, he returned to his apartment, a place that once felt like the pinnacle of success and now felt hollow, stripped of meaning. The image of the 2 little boys persisted in his mind, haunting and vivid. Leo and Sam. Their names echoed in his thoughts like a mantra he never knew he needed. He could still see their eyes, so familiar his chest ached, and the way they had looked at him, without recognition. They didn't know him. They didn't know he existed. And that realization, more than anything else, broke him. The next morning, he requested a private DNA test. He didn't tell anyone. Not his assistant, not his legal team, not his parents. This wasn't about legality. This was about something he couldn't name, something urgent and personal, as if he needed permission to believe the truth, even though every part of him already knew. The results came 3 days later, a 99% match. There was no denying it. He was their father. Mason stared at the document in silence for a long time. Then, he folded it carefully and put it away in a drawer, as if it were something sacred and heavy. Not a piece of paper, but a door he had just opened. A door he, unknowingly, had locked from the outside 5 years ago. He contacted Isla through the event coordinator, not wanting to come on too strong. She agreed to meet with him, once, at a small cafe in a quiet neighborhood. No lawyers, no assistants, just them. He arrived in his usual poised self, but she was dressed simply, her hair pulled back. She looked tired, but serene, and more beautiful than he remembered. Life had shaped her in new ways, adding a gravity to her gaze that hadn't been there before. He stood up when she walked in. She didn't smile. They sat across from each other. Two people with years of pain between them, and two boys who had bonded them forever without knowing it. For a long moment, they said nothing. The noise of the cafe hummed around them, clinking mugs, steaming milk, quiet conversations. "I have the results," Mason said finally. "They're mine." Isla nodded. "I know." He ran a hand through his hair, struggling to find words that meant enough. "I don't know what to say to you." She looked at him with clear eyes. "Then don't say anything you don't mean." "I mean everything now," he said. "It's just, Isla, I didn't know. I swear to you, I had no idea." "I believe you," she said. "But that doesn't erase what happened." He looked down, shame washing over him. "I wanted to fight for you. I was going to. But my parents, the board, it all came crashing down. I didn't know how to be the man they expected, and the man you needed. You chose them," she said, without malice. "You walked away." He nodded slowly. "I did, and I had to raise them without you," she continued. "While you were building empires, I was building cribs. While you were giving speeches, I was trying to get enough for dinner." Mason flinched. Her words weren't cruel. They were just true, and they hit harder than he could have anticipated. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," he said. "Not yet. I just want a chance to know them, to be a part of their lives, even if it's just on a small scale, even if it's just—" He paused, his voice faltering. "I can't go back, Isla, but I can show up now. I can try." She studied him intently. They're 5 years old. They don't understand betrayal or loyalty, but they do understand presence. You can't just walk in and out. You can't start and stop. If you want to be in their lives, it has to be for good. "I am," he said, without hesitation, "no matter what it takes." She nodded, still cautious, but something in her posture softened. "Then you'll start slow. You'll pick them up from school one day. You'll go to the park, sit with them, let them come to you. If they ask questions, answer them honestly. If they run from you, don't chase them, just be there." Mason nodded humbly. "Okay, I can do that." As they left the cafe, they didn't part with hugs or promises. Just with an understanding. A fragile agreement between two people who were no longer in love, but were bonded forever. Isla walked ahead, and Mason followed at a respectful distance. Not as a couple, not yet as a father, but as a man, finally trying to fix what had once gone so terribly wrong. How difficult do you think it was for Isla to accept this proposal from Mason? And what do you think Mason will do now? The third chance. Mason's first visit to the children's school was nothing like the corporate events he was used to. There were no sharp suits, no rehearsed speeches, no executives to impress. Instead, there were sticky fingerprints on classroom walls, paper airplanes flying down the hallway, and the unmistakable chaos of 25-year-olds navigating their tiny universes. Mason stood near the school door in a casual sweater and jeans, awkward and unsure of what to do with his hands. He had reviewed multi-million-dollar acquisitions without a sweat, but waiting to pick up his children who didn't even know they were his, made him feel like a nervous teenager. Isla had arranged it carefully. She told the kids a friend was picking them up and taking them to the park. No labels, no explanations. just a chance for them to meet him on neutral ground. When Leo and Sam came barreling out of the school gates, Mason recognized them instantly. Their blonde hair was shining in the sunlight, and their identical blue eyes lit up when they saw him, though they had no idea who he was. He knelt down, unsure of the script. "Hi, I'm Mason. Your mom asked me to take you to the park today. Is that okay?" The boys looked at each other, then at him. Leo tilted his head. "You're the man from the building with all the suits?" Mason smiled. "Yep, that was me." Sam squinted. "Do you have snacks?" Mason laughed. "Yes, lots." That was enough. They took his hand without hesitation, leading him while chattering about dinosaurs and spaceships, and how Leo's teacher said Pluto wasn't a planet anymore, which he thought was totally unfair. Mason listened to it all, answering when he could, but mostly just soaking them in. Their voices, their expressions, their absolute, unfiltered joy. It was overwhelming in the best possible way. At the park, they ran to the swings, and Mason sat on a nearby bench, watching them. For a few minutes, he allowed himself to pretend that this had always been his life, that he had always been there for them on days like this, in moments like this. But that illusion broke when Sam fell from the slide and scraped his elbow. He didn't cry immediately. He just stood still, his eyes wide and bright, trying to decide if the pain was worth it. Mason rushed over without thinking, kneeling down and gently examining his arm. "Are you okay?" he said in a low voice. "It's not bleeding, just a bump." Sam blinked. "You look like Mommy." Mason paused, then said in a low voice, "I'm trying to be good at this." Sam leaned into him for just a second, and that small gesture nearly broke Mason in two. He looked up and saw Leo standing nearby, watching him intently. There was something calculating in his gaze, not suspicious, but a quiet assessment. Mason knew that look. He had used it himself so long ago when he was trying to decide if someone was safe. Leo finally approached. "Are you going to come back?" Mason looked him in the eye steadily. "Yes, I'll be back." Leo nodded once, as if satisfied. Then he ran off again, calling for Sam to chase him. Mason stayed there for a moment longer, trying to catch his breath. That single question, "Are you going to come back?" had felt heavier than any contract he had ever signed. But his answer had come out true. He would be back, again and again. The visits continued, quietly and steadily. Mason showed up at school pickup, at the park, at birthday parties for classmates he didn't know. He learned which juices they hated, which superhero was in style that week, and how to break them up when they fought over the same piece of a Lego. He learned to get on his knees and really listen, to put his phone away, to simply be there. Over time, the kids grew used to him and laughed more. They called him by his first name, with a little more familiarity. Leo started asking questions. "Did you know my mommy when she was young? Do you live in a really big house? Why don't you have any kids?" Mason answered honestly and carefully. He never rushed them. He never tried to gain something they weren't ready to give. One afternoon, as he was walking them back to Isla's apartment, Sam reached for his hand without being asked. Leo did the same. Then, he looked up and asked, "Why are you always smiling when we're talking?" Mason looked at them both, their cheeks flushed from running, their matching backpacks bouncing with every step. "Because I'm lucky," he said simply. "I get to be here with you." Isla was waiting at the door, her arms crossed, unsure. She always watched him closely after each visit, as if trying to measure whether he had gained another inch. But this time, something shifted. She saw the children run inside, laughing, telling her about the swings, and how Mason almost fell trying to run with them. And then, She looked at him. "You didn't leave today," she said in a low voice. "You stayed even when Sam got scared. You stayed even when Leo fell." Mason nodded. "I told them I would." Isla looked down, then back up at him. "Keep doing that." And just like that, without grand gestures or emotional speeches, the wall between them lowered. It wasn't gone, but it was thinner. And Mason knew this wasn't about being forgiven in one moment. It was about showing up for 100 of them. And he would, every single time. The true meaning of a father. Mason didn't expect the word to come so soon. It had been nearly 3 months since he started seeing Leo and Sam regularly. He never missed a visit. He was never late. He learned to sit in silence when they were in a bad mood, to join in when they asked for help with puzzles, and to listen when they just needed to talk, even if what they were saying didn't make much sense. He was careful not to push too fast. He had accepted the fact that, for now, he was just Mason, the man who brought good snacks, who played hide-and-seek without checking his phone, and who laughed at their jokes, even when they didn't make sense. But something had changed. It was a Saturday afternoon. Isla had an interview for a new design contract and asked Mason if he could watch the boys for a few hours. He accepted immediately, and she dropped them off at his apartment, which he had recently baby-proofed, though he never thought he would need to. Toys now lived in wicker baskets in the living room. A small table with crayons and construction paper sat near the window. The fridge was stocked with juice boxes, string cheese, and the kind of sugary cereal he didn't approve of, but bought anyway, because they loved it. That afternoon, they built an elaborate pillow fort between the couches, with tunnels and a command center made from old shoeboxes and flashlights. Leo declared himself captain. Sam insisted on being the science officer because he had brought a magnifying glass. Mason played along as Daddy Commander, a name Sam made up in the middle of their game, and said without thinking. Mason froze for a second, caught off guard by the word. "Daddy!" He didn't respond immediately, afraid that if he reacted too much, Sam would take it back. So he just smiled and played along. But inside, he was a jumble of emotions. The word kept echoing in his mind. He hadn't earned it yet. Or maybe he had. Slowly, in pieces. Not through grand gestures, but through consistency, time, and quiet love. Later, after they had eaten pizza and were lying under the pillow fort watching cartoons, Sam snuggled up next to him and looked at him. "Can I call you Daddy now, or do I have to wait?" Mason felt his throat tighten. He looked at Sam's small, serious face, then at Leo, who was also watching him, silently clutching his favorite stuffed dinosaur. Mason reached out and pulled them both close. "You can call me whatever you want," he said, his voice cracking. "But if you want to call me Daddy, I would be so proud of that." Sam nodded. Leo gave him a small smile, the kind that says more than words. That night, Isla came to pick them up. She found them asleep on the couch, Sam lying on Mason's chest, Leo curled up beside him, both snoring softly. Mason had fallen asleep too, his arm protectively draped over them both, the television still on at a low volume. She didn't wake them up right away. She just stood there for a long moment, simply watching. Something inside her, something that had been locked away, began to shift. She saw the way Mason held them as he slept, as if they had always been there. She saw how safe they looked, how peaceful. When she finally woke him, Mason stirred slowly, blinking as he realized where he was and what time it was. "I'm so sorry," he whispered. "We must have all fallen asleep." Isla shook her head. They were happy. That's what matters. As he gently lifted the boys and helped her get them to the car, he looked at her. "Sam called me Daddy today," he said in a low voice. "He asked if it was okay." Isla didn't speak right away. Then she looked at him and said, he wouldn't have asked if he didn't already feel it. The drive home was quiet. Mason rode in the back seat next to the boys, holding their hands as they slept. Isla watched them in the rearview mirror, and something inside her settled for the first time in a long time. The walls she had built to protect herself, understandable and necessary walls, began to lower. Not all at once, but piece by piece. That night, Mason couldn't sleep. He lay awake in his apartment, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the way Sam had looked at him when he said the word Daddy. It wasn't a title you could claim. It had to be given, earned, and now it had been. In the quiet of that night, for the first time in years, Mason felt complete. Not because of success or wealth or reputation, but because two little boys had decided to let him in. Not as a guest, not as a visitor, but as their father. Comment below if you think the story will have a happy ending. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. The reckoning and true success. Mason hadn't planned on confronting his parents. He had avoided it for months, pushing down the urge every time it arose, focusing instead on showing up for Leo and Sam, on earning Isla's cautious trust, on building something genuine from the pieces of the life he had once destroyed. But there came a point when silence no longer felt like strength. It felt like surrender. The deeper he got into fatherhood, the more he saw what he had almost lost forever, and the more unbearable it became to know his parents had stolen it from him, with a smile and a firm handshake. He had to face them, not for closure, but for clarity. He needed them to see what they had done, and more importantly, what he would never let them do again. He arrived at the Anderson estate on a Sunday morning. It was exactly as he remembered, impeccably landscaped, cold, and quiet. A place designed for appearances, not for comfort. His father met him in the study, sitting in the same leather chair where so many past conversations had been framed as lectures. His mother appeared moments later, as pristine as ever, with an unreadable expression. "I'm surprised you came," his father said, lacing his fingers together. "We didn't think we would hear from you again." Mason didn't sit down. He stood near the fireplace, his posture quiet but unyielding. "We need to talk. About Isla. About the children." His mother stiffened at the mention of her. "We warned you about her years ago." Mason turned to her, his voice sharp but controlled. "You didn't warn me. You lied to me. You blocked letters. You ignored calls. You told people to keep her away from me." His father's eyes narrowed. "We did what was necessary to protect your future. You were emotional, focused. You would have thrown away your entire legacy for a girl who had nothing." Mason took a deep breath, fury rising in his chest. "That girl is the mother of my sons. The boys you never cared to know existed. She raised them alone, with nothing, and they've turned out better than anything this family has ever produced." His mother stood, her voice clipped. "Don't be dramatic. You think we didn't make sacrifices for you, for this name, for your success?" "My success," Mason interrupted, "has nothing to do with this name anymore. The company, the image, the money, none of it matters if it costs me my humanity. You tried to make me choose between love and legacy, and I listened. I walked away from the only real thing I had. But I will not make that mistake again." There was a heavy silence. His father leaned back, his tone suddenly colder, more strategic. "And now? You're going to play house with some woman and pretend you're a family man? You think the world is going to swallow that?" Mason looked at him, disgusted. "I don't care what the world swallows. I care what Leo and Sam see when they look at me. I care what kind of man I am when I tuck them into bed at night. And I care about the woman who carried that weight when I walked away." His mother opened her mouth, but he didn't let her speak. "I'm not here to ask for your blessing. I'm here to tell you that your control ends here. If you can't accept my family, you won't be a part of our lives. That is your choice. But I'm done living under your version of success." They didn't respond immediately. There was a crack in the room, a visible fracture in the illusion of power they had always held over him. For the first time, Mason wasn't the boy seeking approval. He was the man drawing the line. "I feel sorry for you," he added in a low voice. "You'll never get to know them. You'll never get to hear Leo explain how he thinks the moon controls feelings, or see the way Sam draws his dreams. You'll miss it all, and one day you'll realize you traded your grandchildren for control." He turned and walked out, leaving them in their perfect, empty house. When he returned to his apartment, Isla and the children were waiting. She looked up when he walked in, reading his face in an instant. "You told them?" she said. He nodded. "Everything." "And?" "They didn't take it well." Isla walked closer. "Do you regret it?" Mason looked at his sons, who were building block towers on the floor, their giggles echoing through the room. "Not for a second," he said. That night, after the boys were in bed, Isla handed him a small box. Inside was a photograph, one she had taken weeks ago when he wasn't looking. He was sitting on the park grass, with Sam in his lap, Leo leaning against his side, all three of them laughing. She had printed it out, framed it. A silent gesture, a thank you, a beginning. Mason held the photo for a long time before he placed it on the bookshelf next to the children's art projects. He no longer needed validation from anyone but them, his family, his future, the life he chose. Finally, on his own terms. What do you think of Mason's decision to confront his parents? And what does this small gesture from Isla mean? A realistic fairy tale ending. Autumn in the city had a way of softening everything. The sharp edges of buildings faded under a golden light. The noise of traffic seemed gentler, and even the wind had a kind of quiet peacefulness to it. For Mason, the change in seasons mirrored what was happening inside him. Something that had been cold for a long time had begun to thaw, and in its place was a warmth he had once feared he didn't deserve. It had been almost a year since he found out about Leo and Sam, and every day since then had been a choice. He had chosen them. He had chosen Isla. He had chosen to show up again and again, not as the perfect man, but as a present one. Life wasn't flawless, but it was full. His mornings started with spilled cereal, mismatched socks, and the chaos of getting 2 5-year-olds out the door. His nights ended with bedtime stories and small hands clutching his shirt as they fell asleep beside him. His apartment had long since transformed from a sleek, lifeless bachelor pad into a warm, lived-in home where finger paintings covered the walls and little sneakers were always left by the door. The kids called him Daddy now, without hesitation. Sometimes with excitement, sometimes with frustration, sometimes in whispers when they needed comfort. And each time it still hit him with the quiet force of a wonder. Isla had softened too. Not entirely. There were still moments when the weight of their history would make her withdraw a little. But those moments were fewer now, and always followed by something small, but significant. A look, a hand on his back, a sentence unfinished, but understood. They had rebuilt trust one day at a time, not through dramatic apologies or grand gestures, but through the simple rhythm of shared responsibility and mutual care. He respected her more than ever, not just for raising the boys alone, but for doing it without letting her pain turn her bitter. She had every reason to shut the door on him forever, but she didn't. And that forgiveness, unsaid but felt, was the greatest gift he had ever received. On a Saturday morning, as the boys played in the living room, and Isla made coffee in the kitchen. Mason stood by the window with a small box in his hand. It wasn't velvet or branded. It was simple, clean, and carefully chosen. Inside was a ring, delicate but strong. He had spent months thinking about how to ask her. At first, he imagined something grand. Roses, photographers, some sweeping gesture with the skyline behind them. But that wasn't their story. Their story had been rebuilt in quiet hours, in soft apologies, in hallways littered with Legos and notes signed in crayon. He didn't need fireworks. He needed the truth. He walked into the kitchen and waited for her to look up. She raised an eyebrow at the seriousness on his face. "What's wrong?" she asked. "Nothing," he said. "That's the point." He took her hand and led her to the living room where the boys were still playing. They looked up, curious but not surprised. Mason got down on one knee, and for a moment, everything around them faded into silence. "I don't want to rewrite the past," he said. "I just want to write the rest of the story with you in it. As your partner, as the father of our sons, as the man who finally understands what it means to love completely and to show up completely." Isla's eyes glistened, but she didn't cry. She was too strong for that. She smiled, small at first, then wider, and nodded. "Yes," she said simply, "because I don't need perfection. I just need you." The boys cheered, not entirely sure what had just happened, but sensing it was something good. They piled into his arms, throwing him off balance, until they all toppled over in a heap of laughter on the rug. The wedding came a few months later. It wasn't extravagant. It didn't need to be. They held it in the small community garden Isla had helped design years ago. Friends gathered, close and quiet, seated among rows of flowers and ivy-covered fences. The boys wore matching vests and carried the rings, too excited to walk slowly down the aisle. Isla wore a simple ivory dress, her hair loose with a single daisy tucked behind one ear. Mason couldn't stop smiling as she walked toward him, her steps steady, her eyes locked on his. There were no speeches about fate, no poetic quotes, just vows spoken from the heart, short, honest, and unpolished. Promises to choose each other, not just on the bright days, but on the difficult ones too. Promises to raise a family together, to make mistakes and to forgive them, to hold each other accountable, and to hold each other close. When they kissed, it wasn't the kind of kiss that marked a beginning. It was the kind that sealed something already built, slowly, painfully, beautifully. Afterward, as the sun set and the garden glowed with a golden light, Leo and Sam ran through the grass, shouting with joy. Mason stood watching them, his hand intertwined with Isla's, his chest full of a peace he had never known in his old life of boardrooms and silence. He had once believed that success meant power, image, control. But standing there, barefoot in a garden, with the love of his life at his side and his children chasing butterflies in front of him, he finally understood what it truly meant. He was home, completely, finally. And this time, he wasn't going anywhere. The powerful and subtle ending. In the end, this story's conclusion isn't just satisfying, it's subtly powerful. It doesn't rely on an over-the-top redemption or a fairy tale perfection, but celebrates the slow, human work of rebuilding. Mason's transformation isn't instant but earned, one step at a time, through presence, humility, and a willingness to face what he once ran from. That's what makes it meaningful. Isla's strength is the emotional backbone of the story. She never needed to be saved. She needed respect, consistency, and truth. And in the end, she got all of it. Not because she forgave easily, but because she knew her worth. The love they rediscover isn't naive or idealized. It's mature, layered with pain and healing, and stronger because of what they survived. The final image, a family built on love, choice, and second chances, isn't just beautiful. It's hopeful. It reminds us that broken things aren't always lost. Sometimes they are just waiting to be put back together, brick by brick, with honesty. Don't forget to comment if you liked this story and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Thanks for watching.